This story is a story of independence and strength, the story of Pak Chung-yang, and it's symbolic of all of Korea. This epitaph has been in my home for 45 years. I bought it when I was a student. I did not buy it as an investment or as a work of art. I bought it as a historical document because I could read that it said, this is the record of a family. And it said that the owner of the principal of the document was the wife of a man named Pak Chung-yang. But it did not say that he was the ambassador. It said he was the Minister of Finance, Hojo Pansa. And I didn't realize till sometime later that he was the first ambassador to the United States. There are lots of Hojo Pansa, but only one first ambassador to the United States, which really makes the document unique. When I first bought it, I bought it as a historical document, and I bought several other things as a student, never paying much money because I was a student. It was not an expensive thing. In fact, it was broken. I'll show you. I'll show you pictures of it in a minute, but on the back you can see it's been damaged, and I think because of that, it was maybe considered worthless. And I feared that if I didn't buy it, the antique shop might throw it away, because nobody's going to buy it because it's damaged. You know, you don't buy a ceramic with a big chip in it. But I bought it for its content, not for its value. It's actually broken in 4 pieces. One big piece, a medium-sized piece, a little piece, and the edge broke off. Somehow, whoever fixed it put some good glue on it. It holds together very well. I feared over the years that it would break again, but it has never broken, and it's been very firm and solid. And it's just beautiful. It's just beautiful. And when I first got it, I displayed it in my home, like on a display like this, on a shelf, for its beauty. And the calligraphy is just beautiful. And one day I was showing it to a friend who came, and I explained that it was it says on the edge here, a guanji, meaning today we say myogalji or myoji sok, and I knew it was buried with the body. And I was explaining that to someone, and suddenly I felt very different about this thing. I felt it was like a shinui, the spirit tablet at the sadang. And at the spirit tablet at the sadang, there's a belief that the spirit is in or associated with the shinui. And I started thinking of this as a shinui. And I started thinking that Madame Cho is here. And it's not right to just put it out on a display. And so I put it in my drawer and hid it for years and years and years. And now, doing my YouTube channel, I thought, well, I should do a program about this. I did 2 programs, one in English, one in Korean. And in both programs, I said, if I can find the owner, the descendants of these people, I will happily give it to them. Well, we found the owner. Thanks to the people here, thanks to Cho Hang Ni right there, who saw my YouTube program and contacted me and asked if I would loan the document, the tablet, to the museum for this display. And I said, more than happily, I would loan it. In fact, I'd like to give it to the owner, if we can find the owner. So I'll loan it to you. I might be even willing to sell it to the museum because it would be a good display place. But above all, we need to find the owner, if we can. Well, they found the owner. The owner's 2 daughters are here, and their nephew, who's the Chongson, is in Seoul, and I've been in touch with him. We'll have pictures of him in just a moment. On the day that I signed the papers and gave this away, I had a very strange feeling, like a friend had just left, and a friend that had been in my house for 45 years, and then she left. And I felt very lonely in a strange sort of way to see my friend go away. And now to hold it in my hand again for perhaps the last time, it's really a powerful feeling for me. So today we're going to talk about this and how it connects to Pak Chung-yang, okay? The family background of Pak Chung-yang. So that's what I want to talk about, and I've got several layers of information about this that I want to discuss with you. So it's all from the perspective of this burial tablet of his first wife, Madame Cho, of the Yangju Cho clan. I mentioned that I did 2 videos. This one I did in English with Hi Chad. Do some of you know Hi Chad? Hi Chad is a very successful YouTuber. He's a former student of mine, and he helped me get started on YouTube. And then the one I did in Korean is over there, and I did this one with my good friend Shin Chae-yong, a young professor, recent PhD, who's a specialist on Puma, the Wang Esawi. And he has helped me to see the Wang Esawi in this family. There's a lot of Wang Esawi. There's a lot of Puma in this family, in the extended family. So I've got these 2 videos, and if you haven't signed up for YouTube 우물파괴 개구리 아직 안 오셨으면 하세요. I'm trying to tell a new story about Korean history. I have a quite different view of Korean history from what I was taught. And for a long time, I felt like I had to be quiet because I didn't want to offend my Korean friends by saying I thought it was different. But finally, about the time I turned Hwangap, I could not be quiet any longer. And I said, no, I look at it this way. For example, I see the typical Korean attitude about history as one of victimization, piheja. And I reject that idea. The 20th century, Korea was a victim, no question about that. But in the long haul, Korea was not really victimized. Korea was remarkably independent. We talk about Sadejui and we talk about subjugation by the Chinese. I don't buy that. I see rather the fierce independence of Korea, and it's symbolized by Pak Chung-yang. He was independent. The Chinese told him he couldn't be an ambassador. He said, oh, yes, I can. And he did it anyway. So it's a remarkable story. Well, here is our friend. You can see it up close. Madame Cho's epitaph, I call it. And what I want to do today is take you through this epitaph line by line and talk about what it says and what it means. And then I'm going to come back a second time. I call it the layers of an onion. I'm peeling off the layers of the onion and going deeper and deeper with each step, okay? Hapshida, here's the back. I just showed you this, and you can see it was damaged. We don't know how. Somebody said that they thought it was Togor, a grave robber, that stole it. I don't think so. We know that her grave was moved. It says it was in Suwon, and she is now in Uijeongbu, at the family plot in Uijeongbu. So they moved the grave. I don't know why. I know that the Palampak family has graves in Uijeongbu, and it may have been that she was buried near her family temporarily in Suwon. It may have been because of construction in the area that they had to move her grave. For whatever reason, they moved her grave. And 한국에서는 이장하는 것은 이상한 일이 아니잖아요. 이장하는 일이 꽤 잘해요. In America, you have ijang, you move a grave sometimes, but not very often. But in Korea, you'll move it for the sake of construction, for the sake of better pungsu. pungsu 치리설이 있어서 이 장도 하는 거 있잖아. But for whatever reason, her grave was moved. And I think that the tablet was damaged when they moved the grave. And as they were digging, the shovel hit it. And it shattered it into 4 pieces. And I have supposed that because they damaged it, they thought it worthless and threw it away, is what I've supposed. I don't know. And someone who saw it thrown away said, oh, no, we can fix that. And they got this super glue of some kind and put it back together, and it shows up in the antique shop. Again, not for very much money, but it was in the antique shop. People have asked me where. I don't know. I think it was in Insadong, but it might have been Cheonggyecheon Chilga, where there are some antique shops. People ask me how much I paid. I don't know. I can't remember. I didn't get a receipt. I was a poor haksang, and I could not have spent more than $10 or $20 for it. So it was not a high-priced item. And I bought it for its intellectual value, not for its ceramic value. Here's the first line. It says, Chahon Debu, Hojo Panso, Panam Pakjangyang. So there we know who it is. And here was the reason I thought we were talking about the Hojo Panso and not the first ambassador to the United States. So he finished off his career in the cabinet, in King Kojong's cabinet as his finance minister. He had other positions, and we know he was quite close to King Kojong. And unfortunately, he died in 1905. But before he died, one of his last acts was to write a note to Kojong protesting the protectorate treaty by the Japanese. He felt that was not right, and he saw a different path forward. We should have listened to him. We should have listened to him somehow. So there's the first line. And the bottom of the first line gives his ja, which was Chijung. Chijung means to the middle. What a great familiar name, to be in the middle. And that's the heart of Confucianism, Jungyong, the middle path. The tablet does not say what his ho was. His ho was Tukchun, the bamboo spring. Good ho, natural imagery. And he has a shiho. Do you understand what a shiho is? It's a special ho, a special honorific name given by the king. And there was a certain formula to determine what the shiho would be. And if he was a munshin, it was very often moon. And if he was a mushin, it was very often mu. You know Chungmugong? That's his shiho. That's not his pen name. That's his shiho. So it was Moon Ik, and he died right at the tail end of the Chosun dynasty. He was certainly one of the last people to get a shiho. I just wonder, after 1905, how many shiho were given, because Korea was very chaotic at that point, and organized government affairs may not have allowed the time to sit back and say, oh, let's give a shiho to so-and-so who died. So I think he was probably one of the last people to get a shiho from the king. 재밌죠? I think it's interesting. I recently got a ho. I decided I'm 76 years old, and I write books and I teach. I should have a ho. So I asked my YouTube people to help me pick a ho. And I told them I wouldn't necessarily pick the one they chose first. I wanted to have some options, but I had nominations, several different nominations for my ho. And the one that got the most votes I decided I do like is Saw You, the Western Sunbee. That's me in my better moments. And I thought if I have a ho, I should have a ja. And if I'm Saw You, that means I like Yu-Go. I like Yu-Go. Yu-Gi-Oh on my YouTube channel is attacked a lot nowadays. People don't like Yu-Gi-Oh, but I like Yu-Gi-Oh. And my Ja is Utah. I'm from Utah. But Utah means, Yu is Confucianism and Ta means to others. I want to take Confucianism to other people. So that's my Ja, and that's my Ho. I'll never have a She-Ho. She-Ho are impossible to get these days. Then it goes on, and it says, he married a Chengguin, which is a 2 senior rank. You know the ranking system of the traditional Chosun dynasty? There were 9 ranks, and there was Chung and Chong in each rank. We call it senior and junior, or A and B. So she was a 2 senior rank, which is pretty high. There were very, very few ones. You had to be prime minister or a counselor to be a 1 or a 1B. But she was a 2 senior rank. And then it says Yangju Choshi. So that's who we're talking about. And on the edge of the document, what's it say? Chosun Guk. So look at the idea that this is an international perspective. Of course it's Chosun Guk, but it says so, in case someone from outside were to see it. Chosun Guk, Chengguin, Yangju Choshi, I think that's Guan Ji, a funerary tablet or an epitaph for Madame Cho of the Yangju Cho lineage. Then it goes on, it says her father, and it uses the word ko. The ko character here is father who's dead, a deceased father. Her father was a gunsu, a county magistrate, by the name of Pyong Ui. We'll come back and talk about him. He had some problems. And then it says her mother, and here again, this character is used for a deceased mother, not a living mother. Her mother, who's obviously deceased, was of the Changwan Huang family. And we'll talk about this just a little bit later on. Then there's a space right here. And you might think a space indicates a new sentence, a new paragraph. But no, in Chinese documentation, a space means the king. And this is an honorific space showing that the king is being referred to in the next statement. And you see there are 2 spaces. There's one here, and there's one here. And the king is Honjong, so it gives an honorific space. Here is a position or a title serving the king, so it gives an honorific space. You don't have a space to show a sentence or a paragraph. The Chinese just all runs together, which makes it hard to read a lot of times. So here's an honorific space, and then it says, Honjong, Shinchuk, it doesn't say Nyan, it could say Shinchuk Nyan, but it doesn't have the Nyan, it just says Shinchuk, Yuwol Shipsam Il Sang. So she was born in the Shinchuk year. Which Shinchuk year? The Shinchuk year of Honjong. And the Shinchuk year of Honjong turns out to be 1841. So this is a way of saying she was born in 1841. Then it gives her death. And it says at the bottom here, going up to here, now song. What do you suppose this song means? Song is the way the Shillok and other documents refer to the king. Song means king. And Kum Song, the king now, who was this gentleman here, was King Kojong. So in the year of our current king, Kojong, in the Imjin year of King Kojong, which turns out to be 1892. That's an easy one to figure out. You don't have to look at the table. For most of these Shinchuk, Byungsul, Kapja, you have to look it up on a table to see what it is. You don't have to look up Imjin in Kojong's period, because Imjin was famously 1592, and you add 60, 60, 60, 300, 560s, 300 to 1592, you get 1892. Bang, there it is. You don't even have to look on the table to see that when she died. Did you get that? Okay. We Chokpo Jengi know this kind of stuff. Chokpo Jengi have to do Kapja years all the time. and I can often figure them out. 사람들이 날 보고 몇 살이냐 할 때 난 보통 병술생이라고 해요. 네. 이번에 한국 갔다 왔는데 고등학교에 한번 강의했습니다. 그 고등학교 고1들이 한 4명 나를 초대했어요. 우리 학교 오라고. 그러니까 난 갔어요. 가는데 그 얘기를 하다가 몇 살이냐 누가 했어요. 나는 병술생이에요. 그러니까 학생들 몰라요, 병술생. 근데 그 학생들 알았어요. 금방 알았어요. 난 깜짝 놀랐어요. 어떻게 이 학생들 아느냐? 야, 동갑이에요. 뒤동갑이에요. These students were, 12 years old or so. So 12 years beyond their 병술. So, they were 16 years beyond, they were 16 years old. They were 16 years beyond my 환갑. Yeah. I suddenly felt very old to discover young people already were 병술 sang. So she died in 임진, 청월 2일 절. So she died then, and then it says Tongwol, the same January, on the 26th. So it took 24 days to prepare her funeral. And on the 26th, she was buried in Suwon, in Hyungsokmyeon, Imokdong, Ja-chwa. Do you know the Ja-chwa business? The Ja is kapja, is Chachukim Yojinsa Omishin Yusuthe, and it indicates the direction in which the grave was facing. And this is helpful for you to find the grave if you want to go there to do ceremonies, because it tells you which direction on the hill it's facing, and that helps you to locate the proper grave. Chokpo serves several purposes. One is to help set up proper marriages, to show family background. The other is to help people to remember to carry out the ceremonies. And this is for the sake of the ceremony, so you can find the proper grave. And many times there's not a stone there, but the orientation of the grave, which way it's facing on the mountain, will help you to identify which grave is hers. So she was buried in the Cha-Dra, which is probably north. It is north, but I don't know. Northerly facing is usually not good. Most graves are better to face south, but nonetheless, she was in the Cha-Dra. Dra is Trasok Dra, where she sat in her grave. This is a Google portrait of Imokdong, of Hyung, Hyung Sok Myeon, Imokdong, and you can see there's a lot of construction. You can see it's a hillside where a person would likely be buried. For Americans who've never been to Korea, Americans think of burying near the church square or in a public spot, usually on flat ground in the middle of the town or the edge of the town. But Korean graves are on the hillsides in private land owned by the family. And you can see on the hillsides there were probably lots of places where there could be burials. But there's been a lot of road construction and different things going on. So I don't know but what they had to move the grave because of construction, or they might have moved the grave to put her with the rest of the Palampak family once her husband had died later. There's an aerial photograph, Google map. It's a funny world we live in. You get a Google map for anything in the world. Then it says, originally, that's this character right here, one, and then it has a character that's been destroyed, which you can figure out. It's Nam. It's Namja. So you can see that originally she had a son whose name was Sungil. And now we're going to learn about Sungil. Chui, he took a wife from the Hansan Yi clan, who was the daughter of Yi Sung-yuk Nyo, and then, period, in Chinese you have to find out where the period goes, period, he passed the Munhua exam. And Pak Chung-yang, we know, passed the Munhua exam in 1866. And so he passed the Munhua, and I verified it. He did indeed pass the Munhua. He's listed on the list. And then Yok, his career, space. What's the space? Honorific space, serving the king. Kyujangak, Taegyo. So he served as a lecturer in the Kyujangak. The Kyujangak was the royal library, right? And Ji reached the level of Sungji. Sungji 1, Sungji Ilgi. You know Sungji, the royal secretariat? These are the 4 men that would sit in front of the king when he was speaking with his court and write everything down. So these men had to be smart to write everything in Chinese. Their record that night, they all had to sit down that night and take the 4 different records they all had and put it into one flowing record called the Sungjanwan Ilgi. And we figure that about 1/4 of what they wrote goes in the Sungjanwan Ilgi. The Sungjanwan Ilgi is used to write the Shillok. And generally speaking, the Shillok contains about 1/4 of what's in the Sungjanwan Ilgi. So things are abstracted down to smaller and smaller levels. So he's right in front of the king, taking down notes of what the king has to say. That's not an insignificant position, especially for one who's starting out. That's quite an important position for a young scholar in the court. But then what does it say? What's this character? He died. And he died without flesh, without an heir. He had no children. In other sources, we look him up, he was 20 years old. He passed the Munhua. He served in the Kyujangak. He was in the Sungjanwan Ilgi before he was 20 years old. This guy was on a fast track to become a very important member of the court, but it was cut short by his death. We don't know how he died. There were diseases in those days and accidents and all sorts of things could have happened. 20 years old. And he had such promise. And Madame Cho had to bury him before she died. There's nothing more painful than to bury a child. Think of Itaewon, where 150 people have had to bury children. Imagine the pain of all those parents burying a child who's in his 20s. So this child died young with tremendous promise, tremendous achievements for a boy, a 20-year-old, just a boy. And yet, that's what happened. So that's all recorded. It's all recorded here on the tablet. And because he was only 20, he was muyuk, no children. Now, they did not adopt an heir for him because Pak Chung-yang remarried. He married a woman from the Indongchang family, and she is in the living memory of our 2 granddaughters here today. They remember her. And they spoke to me yesterday. We had lunch yesterday. It was magnificent. And they told me about their grandmother of the Indongchang family. She was very sophisticated, very gentle, and a very dignified woman, which you would expect in this kind of a family. That's sad. Well, she had 2 daughters. And the older daughter, we find out, married Chung Un-chul of the Yanil Chung family. And he started off as Champong. And Champong is a 9B. It's the lowest rank possible, but it's on the rank. He started on the path. And we know from other documents he got to the level of Kunsu before his career was done. We'll come back to him in a minute. And the Chanyo, the second daughter married a member from the Chanui Ishi by the name of Imuno. And we'll come back and talk about him in just a minute. So that takes us to the end. That's what the document says. That's the first layer of the onion. Now let's go back and peel the onion and get in a little bit deeper, okay? Let's start backwards and go back toward the front. Let's look at the second daughter and see what more we can find about her. Imullo, he has one of these names that should be like Shila, Mullo, but some say Munno, I don't know. He was a member of the Chunri clan, it says, and he was from a very powerful lineage. It turns out he did not pass the Munqua exam, but his father did, his grandfather did, his great-grandfather did, his great-great-grandfather did, his Ode Harabaji did, his Yukde Harabaji did, his Childe Harabaji did, his Palde Harabaji did, his Kude Harabaji did not pass the exam. But his Shipte Harabaji did, and his Ship Ilde Harabaji did. For a list of 11 generations, everyone but one passed the exam. This is one of the strongest lineages in the Chosun dynasty. To have a father and a son pass is remarkable, but to have 10 out of 11 generations, I don't think, I've got to check with my sources, and I'll check with a friend of mine who's very good at this, but I think this is the strongest showing in a Yangban lineage in Korea. You see 2 or 3 generations from time to time, but 10 out of 11? It's unbelievable. So an incredibly powerful family that she had married into. We'll come back and peel another layer of this onion in just a minute. The next daughter, moving back upward, married Chang Un-chol, sorry the screen cut off the L, of the Yanil Chung family. And he's the one that already started out. And he didn't pass the exam, but his father and grandfather did. So again, a very powerful Yangban family. And other ancestors up along the way all passed exams, going up to and including Chung Mong-ju. He was a descendant of Chung Mong-ju. Chung Mong-ju is one of my favorite people in all of Korean history. His story is absolutely remarkable. He was asked, as you know, to join the new dynasty. And he said, no, I am a Confucian scholar. I am nothing if I am not loyal to my king. There cannot be 2 suns in the heaven. There cannot be 2 kings on the throne. 이몸이 주고 일백번 고쳐주고 백골이 진도되어 녹시라도 있고 없고 님 향한 일편단심이야 가실 줄 있으리야 했잖아요. And he died. Tremendous. And yet, I just went to his tomb last week in Korea. And at the side of his tomb, there's a tablet that was erected by Lee Tae-jong. Who killed Chung Mong-ju? Lee Bang-won, Lee Tae-jong. And yet this spirit tablet was erected by Lee Tae-jong, in effect saying, I'm sorry, old man. And it's listed as the protector of the Koryo dynasty, is what it said on the tombstone. And the thing that's interesting to me is that Chung Mong-ju's descendants all served in the Chosun court. It was not that Chung Mong-ju was forever banished and his line was forever discriminated against, but he was forgiven and his line served in the new court, which underscores one of my favorite things that I keep talking about over and over again on my YouTube channel is the continuity of tradition in Korea. That you do not kill the owners of the previous dynasty. The Kaya Kim, when they merged with Shila, and they merged, they were not destroyed, they merged with Shila. The Kaya line continues as Kim Hye Kim. There's probably a Kim Hye Kim in here today, and if there's not a Kim Hye Kim here, your mother's a Kim Hye Kim. Am I right? And And with Shila moving to Koryo, again, it was a peaceful transition because Hu Goguryo was the protector of Shila against Hu Pekje. Hu Pekje was destroyed. The 8 surnames of Pekje have disappeared. And Pekje was completely annihilated. And that's the way it is with most dynasties in most places in the world. When the dynasty falls, you annihilate the families of that dynasty. I discovered this accidentally. I wish I'd have thought of it and generated it myself, but at our school, a Yu Hakuseng from Japan showed up, and I just happened to meet her at a function, and I said, "What's your name?" And she said, "Fujiwara." I said, "Fujiwara? That's the royal name of the Heian period." I've studied a little Japanese history, and she the fact that I recognized her name, she was a very humble, Japanese style girl. She said, "Yeah, you know my family." And then she said it. She said, "There aren't many of us. They killed us all off," which is the answer. That's what most countries do, but not in Korea. The 5 most common surnames in Korea today are Kim, Pak, Chejung. 55% of the Korean population have one of 5 surnames. They're all Sorobol names. Sorobol, Shila, is alive and well in Korea today. The continuity. Shila was not destroyed. Shila continued in Koryo. Koryo was not destroyed by Chosun. Your textbooks say there was a big revolution and a Sarimpa and all of this, and a new revolution, and they took over and started a new revolution, and a new dynasty. Baloney. It was the same old dynasty. They asked Cheongmongju to serve, and he said no. Everyone else said yes. The tradition continues in Korea. You do not destroy the past in Korea. The aristocracy have been basically the same for the last 1,500 years. And this idea that there was this revolution and a new dynasty is borrowed from the Japanese. It comes from Korean historians suffering from Japanese envy, wanted to be as dynamic as the Japanese were. Baloney. You don't want to be as dynamic as the Japanese were. You don't want to have dynasties like the Japanese. They were killing each other with samurai swords. Korea doesn't do samurai swords. Korea selects people to serve by how well they can write an exam. It's the contrast of the brush or the pen to the sword. And you know what we say? The pen is mightier than the sword. That's Korea versus Japan, right there, okay? That's all a footnote for my view of Cheongmongju and my view of tradition and peace in Korean society. We found out more about Park Chung-young's first son-in-law from his tombstone. And here's his tombstone. There's a rubbing of it right behind the screen here. We could take down the screen and shine it right on the rubbing back here. It's the same thing. And it says here that the first son-in-law reached the level of kunsu. Oh, where is it? Somewhere in here. That's the first son, daughter. Anyway, it says he got to be kunsu. We saw before he was champong. And so he moved up to chungsu, which was 9 up to about 5. Kunsu is 5 or 4B, somewhere like that. The second son, we find out, died young. And this document, the tombstone, says that the second son had an adopted son come in to replace the line. And that's a very useful thing for Madam Pak, the wife, because having an adopted son comes in preserves her place in the family. You see, the husband didn't have to get another wife. He could honor this wife who brought in an adopted son. So Imulo, the second son, died young and didn't have an illustrious career like some of the other offspring did. Now, let's go back to the first son, the first child, the son. And here we saw that his name was Sungil, and he took a wife from the Hansani family, and we talked about him a minute ago. He died at age 20. Remember, that's this man. And if we look at the tombstones, I visited here 3 days ago with Park Chan-soo, the direct line descendant of Park Chung-yang. He's a professor of marketing at Koryo University. It's all a family of scholars, okay? Very nice man, had a very nice visit. And we went to the tombstone of Park Chung-yang, and off to the side of the tombstone of Park Chung-yang, there are a collection of shindobi. You know shindobi, this kind of gravestone. It's moshi seo. I like this. When I die, I want my people to put up a shindobi for me. Wouldn't that look good in an American cemetery? A nice black stone with a white roofed top on it. I can do that, Maumdero, but you could not do that back then. It had to have the king's permission. You had to have the permission of the king through the Yejo, the Ministry of Ritual, to have a shindobi. So here's the Palampak family of shindobi, all gathered in one place. Why are they all in one place? They were scattered all over, which makes it difficult to do chesa. And what's happening in Korea today is a simplification of chesa in many levels. The food table is becoming greatly simplified. And the meeting time and place is becoming greatly simplified. And some years ago, they decided to simplify this process by putting all these tombstones, these shindobi that were all over the place, and put them in one place. And to the side of it here, I don't have a picture of it, there is a crypt, a small stone house. It only sits about this tall. And inside of it are the ashes of all these people whose bones they took out, cremated the bones, and put them in ashes, in jars, put the ashes in these jars inside the crypt. And Park Chan-soo opened the crypt and showed it to me inside there. Well, the reason I'm showing you this now is right here, this shindobi is this shindobi. And it's the one of Seung-gil. So Seung-gil, who died when he was only 20, yet he had served in the Kyujanggak and was a Seungji, a royal secretary. We saw that on the other document. Though he died when he was only 20, he got his own shindobi. And it's interesting, look here where it says Hansan Ishi. You got this big gash out of the side here. How did that happen? I don't know. But it could have been when they moved the tombstone. It could have been an accident with the pokrane, that dropped it or something. Or it could have been a smash from the Korean War. It could have been an artillery shell. And the reason I think it's that case is here's the backside of one of the shindobi in the back, and you can see very clearly the bullets, the bullet marks. And indeed, in Uijeongbu, there was a lot of fighting. And stray bullets hammered this shindobi. And I hope if there was a guy hiding behind it, I hope he was okay. There might have been a guy hiding behind it. Shindobi is a good place to hide behind in a battle. And then you slip out and shoot and stay undercover behind the shindobi. So again, like many places in Korea, there's evidence still of the Korean War. Let's look at Madame Cho's father and mother. There were problems for her father. Her father, we saw before, his name was Byung-wi. And as I was looking up the background of these people, I saw something rather disturbing. It was in a text that I couldn't read very well, but I saw Amheng Osa. If you have a biography, you don't want the word Amheng Osa in your biography. He got caught. He was Gunsu, and he was arrested by the Amheng Osa for a bribery scandal. And it turns out what happened was when he was made Kunsu, he forced the Ajahn, the clerks, to resign, and then he hired them back for a bribe. And somebody blew the whistle and called him the Amheng Osa. And the Amheng Osa came in and busted him. And the record shows that he was sentenced to 100 lashes and banishment, which is pretty severe. The 100 lashes can be light whip, medium whip, or heavy whip. 100, it didn't say which one it was, and I think the word that it used tells you, but I didn't run this one out. But he was given 100 lashes, and if it was 100 lashes of a heavy whip, you're dead. That's death. The light whip you might survive with a lot of welts on your back, but it turns out there's a way out. You can pay a penalty to get out of it. And he did. He paid the penalty, and the character said, sok, like sok chue, to be forgiven. And he was able to pay probably all the bribe money he took in. He was able to pay that off, and he didn't get the 100 lashes. Professor Sheen reminded me that Hungbu, we all love Hungbu, right? Hungbu Nobu. Isn't Hungbu great? Great guy. How did Hungbu make his money? Well, he didn't have any money. How did he make money? How did he survive? Well, he used to take people's lashes for them, which is ridiculous. That's heavy payment. But you know, the Hungbu story is full of all sorts of humor, and that's one of the jokes in the Hungbu story, is that he took lashes in the place of other people. In the case of Cho Byung-hui, he was able to pay a bail or a fine to relieve himself from the lashes. But he was still banished, and he was banished to Muju, which is in North Chola-do, as far as I know. And with Professor Sheen, we were able to find documents that showed that he was released after only 2 years. Banishment is not the worst thing in the world. On the plane going to Korea, or was it coming back? You can never remember these things. On the plane, there's a new movie out last year it's called The Fish Book. And it's a story of Chung Yao-gyung's brother who was banished, and he wrote a book about fish. And he was inspired by a young man who, in the story, is a hain. He's a soja, actually. He's a soja, but he works himself up and passes the exam and becomes an official. So it's a decent movie. It was okay. And historically, it might not be quite accurate, but it's pretty close. Anyway, Chung Yak-chun, I think, was this man's name. And he wrote this book of fishes and marine life and marine biology while he was in banishment, which reminds us that Chung Ya-gyung, who has the largest moonjeep of any Korean official, this moonjeep was written while Chung Ya-gyung was in banishment. So in banishment, it's not the worst thing in the world. It gives you a chance to read and write and think. So he had, Cho Byung-hui had 2 years to read and write and think. And he was restored, and the documents indicate that he could again use his title of gunsu, that he was restored to his title after he had paid his penalty. So this whole story is told to me by Professor Sheen. And this is a screen capture from our video where we talk about this. And Professor Sheen, he's really great at doing these genealogical charts with different colors for different families. And he was able to ferret out, decipher what happened with Cho Byung-hui. And here's another page showing that one of the Palang Pak women was actually married to Chungjo, and it was the mother of Sunjo. So again, showing the strength, the social prestige of this Palang Pak family. It was not just the line of Pak Jung-yang, but several lines of the Palang Pak family were very prominent. Indeed, these people were Chibechung. They were aristocrats. And several of these lines go up to a Puma. And Shin Cheong here, my good friend, is a Puma Jengi. He's done his dissertation and published a book on Puma. And whenever I talk to him about somebody prominent, like my favorite guy in all Korean history is Lee Yul-gok. And Yul-gok descends from a Puma. His 5-generation grandfather was a Puma. And Shin Saim-dang, from her own line, not the E line, but from the Shin line, she descends from a Puma. And so Professor Sheen is always saying there's among the high prominent families, there's a Puma connection. So we see several of them on this page of relationships and marriages with the Panampak family. Jimmy, say? I think this is really interesting. I hope you do. Okay, so we saw that Professor Sheen thinks that Madame Cho's father was released from banishment fairly early and fairly light punishment because he was part of the inner group. He was part of the Puma-connected aristocracy of the Chosun period. And he was able to pay a bail and not get whipped, and only was banished for only 2 years. Which brings us back now, we've come backward now to Pak Changyang. Now, I'm not going to say much more about him that has not been available on the walls. And there's a couple of brochures we have about him. In Seoul, Pak Chan-su took me to the Kogung Pangmulgwan, the museum at the Gyeongbokgung, where they have a display called Katsun Tesanim, or something like that. The ambassadors wearing kat. You know, kat? And a very nice display there, which is sort of a mini replica of what we have right in front of us and on the 2 floors below us. They have a room that they've reconstructed like one of the rooms down below. So it's a very nice exhibit. If you're going to be in Seoul between now and December 13th, you can go see it. It's closing on the 13th of December, I understand. So you can learn a lot about Pak Changyang and the remarkable things that he did, but I want to just mention a couple of things that really struck me. And Pak Chan-su was very strong at talking about how Pak Changyang wrote the first book about America. Some people think Yu Gil-jun wrote the first book, but Pak Changyang's book about America was 1 year earlier than Yoon Jung-gil's book about America. And as we look at the number of people that Pak Changyang brought with him, he brought with him a freedom fighter, a man who became a famous anti-Japanese fighter, and he brought with him Lee Wan-yong. We don't want to say his name out loud. Yeah, Lee Wan-yong. A friend of mine teaches Korean history at a school in Canada, and he said after class one day, one of the students waited till all the other students had come and gone. Then he went up to him and he said, I want you to know why I'm in this class. I'm the great-grandson of Lee Wan-yong. And he said, I don't want you to tell anybody, but it's okay for you to know that that's my interest in the class. So Lee Wan-yong went down in history as one of the greater villains of Korean history, right? Name me a villain that's considered a greater villain than Lee Wan-yong. But you know, I do fantasy history. Some of you might do fantasy football. There's a thing called fantasy football where you can make up your own football team on how well they do and such. But I do fantasy history. One of my fantasies is, suppose Kojong were not the last king. Suppose the last king were Sejong. How would things have been different? You know, King Sejong, just to write an alphabet, sent 17 ambassadors to China to inquire about other languages in the world and other script systems. 17. What would Sejong have done if he got a report about Catholics? He'd have looked into it. He'd have sent an emissary to see the Pope. What's this about? And he would have wanted to learn about it. Not this negative, hermit reaction that we had in Korea from these unfortunate kings of the 19th century. If Sejong would have heard there was a country called America, what is that? How do you get there? You get on a boat, you take a boat, you can get on a boat and go all the way to America. He would have sent an ambassador. He would have found out about it. And this fantasy that I have is that Sejong would have been well known in the world as this great, thoughtful, scientific king. And Commodore Perry, instead of going to Japan, would have gone to Korea to meet this king. That's my fantasy. Well, part of my fantasy in this regard is, suppose Pak Jong-yong had not died in 1905, and Lee Wan-yong was his Jr., do you suppose that he might have figured out some way to keep Lee Won-young from making the biggest mistake of his life or of Korea's life? I don't know. It's a strange dream to dream. There are so many forces against Lee Won-young. The Japanese were so overbearing and so powerful. And for a temporary moment, the sword was more powerful than the pen. But in the long run, the pen is going to be more powerful than the sword. And we, Koreans, 나도 한국 사람이야, are going to beat the Japanese in the long run. Because look at what happened when the traditional world fell apart. When the traditional world fell apart, the Japanese resorted to what they knew, which was samurai, which was the sword, which led us to World War II and the destruction of Japan. When the traditional world fell apart, what did Korea do? Korea did the only thing it knows how to do. They studied. And they studied and they studied and they studied. And today in Korea, we have the best educated people in the world. The highest literacy rate, the highest graduation rate from high school, the highest graduation rate from college. Why? Because that's the tradition. It's the Sunbi tradition from 1,000 years ago. How do you select people to serve in the government? In Japan, you have pongonjui, and you fight among the samurai, and you develop your daimyo, and one daimyo conquers the other daimyo. It's all by the sword. In Korea, for 1,000 years, you select people to serve in the government by how well they can write. It's not how well they can use a sword, it's how well they can use a brush. And it's paid off today in Korea being not only the country that's known for the resurrection after the Korean War, the rebuilding of the economy, the miracle on the Han, we like to say, but also for all these highest levels of education attainment in the world. Why? 1,000 years of Sunbi tradition, that's why. So that's the way I look at it. And perhaps somehow, if things had been a little different, but we're suffering under the hands, we Koreans suffered under the hand of the Japanese for 35 years, but that's the end of it. No more suffering under the hand of the Japanese. We're strong, we're independent. Park Jang-yong says we're independent. We're independent. We don't need to be subservient or sadejui to anybody. I really dislike it when Koreans talk about the sadejui tradition, that we were sadejui to China, then we were sadejui to Japan, and now we're sadejui to America. I really dislike that. I don't think Korea was sadejui. When I was the Fulbright director in Seoul from 78 to 83, I worked with the American Embassy. They said, you couldn't get cooperation from the Koreans. You know, they had their own ideas of doing things. It was not sadejui to the Americans. Korea's always been independent, this strong independent streak that's embodied in the spirit of Cheonggyeok. Well, let's look at the successors. Let's look at the heirs to this family, to this tablet. There's some sad stories and there's some success stories. The sad stories we've seen are the eldest son died young. We see the second Sawi died young. But there are great success stories. There's one more sad story. Park Jang-yong's son, Sung Chul, was captured by the North Koreans and taken north as a prisoner. There were some rumors about how he had lived and maybe he had remarried. We're not sure if we believe those rumors or not. But he could not have been a happy camper. The son of this Yangban tradition, what did Kim Il-sung think of that? You know, he'd have only one word for it, chiju. You know, you're chiju. You know, you're a landlord. Nothing about the tradition, nothing about the honor of the past, but you're chiju. And I'm sure that Park Sung-chul suffered severely under the hands of the communist regime in North Korea. So they're sad stories, but there are tremendous success stories along the way. The son of Park Sung-chul was I've forgotten his name, 이름 뭐죠? 솔대 대학교, Pak Dong-so, professor at Seoul National University, who is known as the father of the administrative operation of Korea. The 행정 관리 이론 담당자. And I asked Pak Chan-soo if that were true, and he was very humble about it, very self-effacing. He said, well, people say that. And I said, well, what do you say? Don't give me this humble, what do you say? I put him on the spot. And he said, I'm very proud of my father. And Pak Chan-soo is a dignified professor at Koryo University. And I found out here in America, we have some children that have made some major accomplishments. The children of these two granddaughters here have done marvelous things in diplomatic and financial areas. So the tradition continues. It's a family that, Sunbi, the Sunbi tradition goes on. And in my view, that's one of the greatest things about Korean tradition, and it's very well symbolized in the Panampak family and the descendants of Pak Jung-young. That's me with Pak Chan-soo that we've been talking about. We visited the Katsun 미국의 공사 같은 이야기, the exhibition at the museum in Seoul. And here we are at the graveside just 3 days ago. Monday, we were there. Beautiful autumn day, and we visited the tombs. Well, what does it all mean? As a professor, when the student makes a presentation, you say, so what? What does that tell me? Well, I gave you part of the conclusion just now that this is a tradition of excellence, a tradition of education, a tradition of honoring the Sunbi tradition of studying. When I first went to Korea in 1965, Korea was an extremely poor country. It was one of the poorest countries in the world. In other words, there weren't many countries, if any, that were poorer than Korea. In Africa or wherever, there were no countries poorer than beaten up, war-torn Korea. Per capita income in 1965 was $125 a year. That's grindingly poor. And yet, when I talk to students, what are you majoring in? I'm majoring in economics. I'm going to rebuild this country. That was the attitude. We're going to rebuild this country. And I watched it. For the last 57 years, I've watched it. I've watched Korea grow and develop, and it's a miracle. When I first went to Korea, I'm from near Salt Lake City. I'd go into Salt Lake City, the big town, that was the big thing. Salt Lake City was much more sophisticated in 1965 than was Seoul. We used the bank in Seoul, the Sangho Bunhaeng, right next to the Hangul Bunhaeng, Myeongdong. It was 13 stories tall. It was the tallest building in Seoul. Salt Lake City already had 30, 20-story buildings. Salt Lake City was much more sophisticated than Seoul in 1965. Now I go back to Seoul. Mapo is more sophisticated than Salt Lake City. Mapo, 형편없는 Mapo. Cheongnam-ni is more sophisticated than Salt Lake City. Cheongnam-ni, 형편없는 Cheongnam-ni, to say nothing of Gangnam and all the rest of it. When I go to Seoul, I have to stay in Gangbuk. I used to work in the Insadong area, Angukdong area. I lived in Angukdong for a while. So when I went there this time, I stayed in Insadong in a new Marriott hotel in Insadong. And I like the Gangbuk atmosphere. But when I go to Gangnam, it just blows me away. Gangnam is more sophisticated than Park Avenue or Madison Avenue or Lexington Avenue all rolled together. It's just incredible. Brand new steel and glass buildings. So it's a whole new thing. And why? It's because the kids that I met in 1965, the old people that I met in 1965, 보람 있었어요. 보람 있었다고요. 앞으로 큰 나라를 치우겠다고, 만들겠다고 자신 있었는 거예요. And I could sense it. I could feel it. If I were a money man, I'm not a money man, I'm a book man. If I were a money man, I was thinking I should buy some land or something in Korea. I knew then that if I bought a square meter of land in Myeongdong, that I'd be a wealthy man today. I didn't buy my square meter in Myeongdong, but I'm a wealthy man in terms of the knowledge and the experience I've gained from living in Korea. This story is a story of independence and strength, the story of Park Chung-young, and it's symbolic of all of Korea. It's a story of a family through difficulties, through death, still goes on and honors the scholarly tradition. It's the Sunbi tradition in Korea. It's a record of excellence. It's not mediocre, it's excellence. We're doing everything to the best of our ability, which is a good example for all of us and a typical example for Korea. And it's a symbol of the power of Korea, which is the power of the brush, the power of scholarship, the power of education. So those are the conclusions I draw from this story, and that's all I have to say. Kamsahamnida.